The whispers in Seoul's underworld were carved in blood. Long-Soo doesn't break. The 32-year-old ghost of Seoul had silenced rivals with a look and commanded empires with a gesture. He was lethal in a cold, beautiful way, tattoos crawling up his neck like promises of violence. Women feared him. Men obeyed him. No one had ever told him no. Until tonight. Tonight, his dark eyes were locked on the woman standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, bathed in the amber glow of the city below. Marisa Travis, dressed in emerald silk that clung to her like armor. Long-Soo reached for his car keys. The usual script, the expected ending to their evening. "We're leaving," he said, not asked. Marisa didn't even look up from her phone. "Someone else is picking me up." The room went cold. Long-Soo didn't move, didn't yell, didn't threaten. He simply sat back in his leather chair, the blue ink on his throat shifting as he reached into his jacket. The click of his lighter echoed like a gunshot. The flame flickered to life, casting shadows across his face as he lit a cigarette, a tiny burning warning of the storm about to break. For the first time in his brutal life, the ghost of Seoul felt fear. Not of enemies or bullets, but of losing the one thing he couldn't control. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Now let's begin. Marisa didn't wait for his response. She turned on her heel, the emerald silk of her dress whispering against her skin as she walked toward the elevator. Each step was deliberate, measured, the kind of walk that said she'd already won this round, even if the war was just beginning. Behind her, Long-Soo remained motionless in his chair, the cigarette burning between his fingers. Smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, ghosting past his tattooed throat. He watched her go with the same intensity he used to watch rivals before he destroyed them. But he didn't move, didn't call out. The ghost of Seoul had learned long ago that silence was the sharpest weapon in his arsenal. Marisa pressed the elevator button. The soft chime felt obscenely loud in the thick quiet of the penthouse. She could feel his eyes on her back, could practically hear the calculations running through his mind. How far would she get? Who was coming for her? What did she think she was playing at? Let him wonder. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper of expensive machinery. Marisa stepped inside, finally allowing herself to glance back. Long-Soo hadn't moved, but something about the way he held himself had changed. The cigarette was burning down to his knuckles, forgotten. His jaw was tight, the muscle there flexing like he was physically restraining himself from crossing the room and dragging her back. Their eyes met across the expanse of polished marble and modern luxury. For a heartbeat, Marisa saw something flicker in his gaze, something raw and desperate beneath all that carefully cultivated danger. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a man who'd built an empire on fear and control. The elevator doors began to close. Long-Soo took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember flaring bright orange in the dim light. Then he stubbed it out in the crystal ashtray on the side table with a violent twist, the sound sharp and final. But he still didn't move. The door sealed shut, and Marisa was alone with her reflection in the polished steel. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her stomach, forcing herself to breathe. This was what she wanted, what she needed. Long-Soo had to understand that she wasn't some possession to be guarded and controlled, shuffled from penthouse to car to wherever he deemed safe enough. The elevator descended in smooth, mechanical silence. 50 floors. 45. 40. She checked her phone. The car would be here in 3 minutes. She'd timed it perfectly. Close enough that Long-Soo couldn't intercept her inside the building. Far enough that she'd already be gone before he could mobilize his men. Because he would mobilize them. That much was certain. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft ding. The lobby of the tower was all marble and gold, staffed by security personnel who knew exactly who Long-Soo was, and what he did in the shadows of Seoul's gleaming skyline. Two of them straightened when they saw her, their expressions carefully neutral. Marisa walked past them without a word, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The revolving doors spun, and then she was outside, the cool night air hitting her face like a baptism. The city sprawled before her, alive with neon and noise. Thousands of people who had no idea that the ghost of Seoul was 50 floors above them, probably still sitting in that chair, probably still deciding whether to let her go, or remind her exactly who owned these streets. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, not one of Long-Soo's cars. This one had no tinted windows that screamed danger, no driver with a shoulder holster barely concealed under an expensive suit. This was hers. Her choice. Her escape. The driver stepped out, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional smile. "Miss Travis?" "That's me." Marisa slid into the back seat, and the door closed with a satisfying thunk. The driver pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic. Through the rear window, Marisa could see the tower growing smaller, its upper floors lost in the Seoul haze. She wondered if Long-Soo was watching from his window. Wondered if he could see her car disappearing into the city's bright chaos. Wondered if he was reaching for another cigarette, or reaching for his phone to unleash whatever hell he'd been contemplating for the past 5 minutes. Her phone buzzed. A single message, no name attached. Just a number she knew by heart. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. Marisa stared at the words, then powered off her phone completely. Let him stew in his own silence. Let him feel what it was like to lose control, to have someone slip through his fingers like smoke. The city lights blurred past the windows, and for the first time in months, Marisa Travis smiled. The sedan wove through the streets of Gangnam, passing beneath a canopy of electric color. Neon signs flickered in Korean and English, advertising everything from luxury brands to underground clubs that didn't officially exist. Marisa watched the city slide past her window, trying to lose herself in the anonymous pulse of Seoul's nightlife. But something felt wrong. The driver took a left onto a quieter street, away from the main thoroughfares. Marisa leaned forward slightly. This isn't the way to Itaewon. Construction on the main road, ma'am. Detour adds maybe 5 minutes. Marisa settled back against the leather seat, but her instincts were whispering warnings she'd learned not to ignore. 5 minutes in Long-Soo's world could mean the difference between freedom and a very different kind of night. She glanced out the rear window. No headlights following too closely. No motorcycles weaving through traffic with suspicious precision. Maybe she really had pulled it off. Maybe Long-Soo was still sitting in his penthouse, letting his pride nurse itself while a black SUV passed them going the opposite direction. Just another vehicle in a city of millions. Except Marisa caught a glimpse of the driver's face in the brief moment before they passed. Sharp jawline. Dead eyes. The kind of face that belonged to Long-Soo's inner circle. Her pulse quickened. The sedan turned onto a broader avenue, and suddenly Seoul opened up before her again in full neon glory. Restaurants spilled light and laughter onto sidewalks, packed with couples and groups of friends. Street vendors sold tteokbokki and hotteok to late-night wanderers. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Except for the man in the black suit standing outside a convenience store, watching her car pass with too much interest. And the motorcyclist at the traffic light. Helmet obscuring his face, but his body language somehow familiar. And the sedan 3 cars back, that had been behind them for the last 4 blocks. Marisa's stomach tightened. He wasn't following her. He didn't need to. Long-Soo had woven himself so deeply into the fabric of this city that he didn't need to chase. He was already there, in every shadow, every corner, every pair of eyes that knew exactly who the ghost of Seoul was and what happened to people who crossed him. Change of plans, Marisa said, keeping her voice level. Take me to Club Cypher instead. The driver nodded without question. Smart woman. In Seoul, you learned not to ask why. They turned down a side street lined with high-end boutiques, their windows dark for the night but their security lights, creating pools of sterile white glow. Marisa pulled out her phone, hesitated, then powered it back on. 3 missed calls, 7 text messages. All from the same number. She didn't open them. Instead, she called her friend Yuna, who answered on the second ring with music thumping in the background. Mari, I thought you were with your terrifying boyfriend tonight. I was. Now I'm not. Are you still at Cypher? Until dawn, baby. You coming through? 10 minutes. Don't tell anyone. Anyone, or anyone. Yuna's voice dropped to something more serious. She knew. Everyone in their circle knew what Long-Soo was, even if they pretended not to. Especially him. Marisa ended the call and watched the city continue to scroll past. They were in Hongdae now, the university district, where the crowds were younger, louder, more chaotic. Harder to track one woman in emerald silk among hundreds of people dressed for a Thursday night that refused to end. The sedan pulled up outside Club Cypher, a 3-story building with blacked-out windows and a line of people waiting behind velvet ropes. The bass was so heavy, Marisa could feel it through the car door. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, and immediately the heat and noise of the crowd enveloped her. This was better. This was anonymous. Long-Soo's eyes couldn't reach into a packed nightclub where everyone was too drunk or too high to care about mafia bosses and their rebellious, what? Girlfriend? Prisoner? She wasn't even sure anymore. Marisa bypassed the line, exchanging a few words with the bouncer who recognized her from previous nights. The heavy door swung open, and she descended into the club's strobing darkness. Inside, the music was a physical force. Bodies pressed together on the dance floor, moving like a single organism to the DJ's relentless beat. Colored lights slashed through manufactured fog. Marisa pushed through the crowd toward the VIP section where Yuna would be holding court. But even here, even in this chaos, she felt it. The weight of being watched. She turned, scanning the crowd. A man at the bar, talking on his phone while staring directly at her. A woman in the corner booth who looked away too quickly when their eyes met. The security guard by the emergency exit who had the bearing of someone trained for violence, not just breaking up drunk fights. Long-Su wasn't here, but his city was. His people were. His reach extended into every shadow and corner, every place she thought she could hide. Marisa found Yuna at a curved leather booth surrounded by friends and bottles of expensive liquor. Her friend's face lit up when she saw her, then immediately clouded with concern. "Girl, you look like you've seen a ghost." Marisa slid into the booth, accepting the drink Yuna pressed into her hand. "Not seen," she said, downing half of it in one burning swallow. "Just realized I'm probably still standing in one." Long-Su sat in the back of his Maybach, the city lights painting his face in alternating shadows and neon. His driver, Min Jae, had been with him for 8 years, long enough to know when silence was required and when information was expected. "Club Cypher," Min Jae said without being asked. "She arrived 11 minutes ago." Long-Su didn't respond. He was scrolling through his phone, reading reports that came in faster than most people could breathe. His network wasn't just extensive, it was suffocating. 3 of his men were already inside the club. 2 more watching the exits. The woman who'd driven Marisa from his building had been identified, background checked, and cleared within minutes of driving away. A nobody, a professional driver from a legitimate service. Disappointing, but the night was young, and Marisa Travis didn't make moves without reasons. She was too smart for simple rebellion, too calculated for empty gestures. "Someone else is picking me up." Those words had been a blade slipped between his ribs, precise and intentional. So who was the someone else? Long-Su's phone buzzed. A message from Kang, one of his most trusted lieutenants. "She's with Yuna Park and her usual group. No suspicious contacts yet. But boss, there's someone asking about her at the bar." Long-Su's jaw tightened. "Who?" His phone rang immediately. Kang's voice came through clipped and professional. Male, late 20s. American accent, but speaks fluent Korean. Tall, athletic build. Asked the bartender if he'd seen a woman in a green dress. Described her perfectly. "Send me a photo." Already done. Long-Su's screen lit up with an image captured from the club's security feed. The man was leaning against the bar, casual in an expensive leather jacket, dark hair swept back from a face that was almost too pretty. But it was his eyes that made Long-Su's blood run cold. Not with fear, but with recognition. Marcus Travis, Marisa's older brother. Long-Su hadn't seen the man in nearly 2 years, not since the night Marcus had shown up at one of his establishments, demanding to speak with his sister. Long-Su had sent him away with a warning delivered through intermediaries. "Interfere, and you'll disappear." Marcus had backed off. Smart man. Until tonight. "He's been in Seoul for 3 days, Kang continued, staying at the Shilla under a different name. We didn't flag him, because he's been keeping a low profile. No contact with Marisa until she needed someone else to pick her up," Long-Su finished, the pieces clicking into place with infuriating clarity. This wasn't about another man. It was about family. About the one connection Marisa had that existed completely outside Long-Su's influence. Marcus Travis was ex-military, private security now, the kind of man who'd spent his career protecting people from threats exactly like Long-Su. And he'd come to Seoul to extract his sister. Long-Su ended the call and lit another cigarette, the third since Marisa had walked out of his penthouse. The smoke filled his lungs like familiar poison. He should have known, should have seen this coming. Marisa had been too quiet lately, too compliant. She'd been planning this. "Boss?" Min Jae's voice was carefully neutral. "Do you want me to take you to the club?" Long-Su considered it. He could walk into Club Cypher right now, could have Marcus Travis bleeding on the floor within minutes, could drag Marisa out by her hair if he wanted to, and no one would stop him. This was his city, his kingdom, but that wasn't how you kept someone like Marisa Travis. "No," Long-Su said, watching the smoke curl toward the Maybach's leather ceiling. "Take me to the Shilla Hotel." Min Jae's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, surprise barely registering on his disciplined face. "Sir? If Marcus Travis has been in Seoul for 3 days, he has a plan. I want to know what it is before he executes it." Long-Su took another drag, the ember flaring bright in the darkness. "And I want him to know that I know." The Maybach glided through the streets with predatory smoothness, leaving Hongdae's chaos behind for the refined wealth of the Yeong district. The Shilla Hotel rose like a palace against the night sky, all traditional Korean architecture meeting modern luxury. The kind of place where international businessmen and diplomats pretended they weren't sharing space with criminals and spies. Long-Su's phone buzzed again. This time, a video feed from inside Club Cypher. Marisa was dancing now, Yuna's arms around her waist, both women laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Like there wasn't a mafia boss tracking her every movement. Like she was free. The emerald dress caught the strobing lights, making her look like something from a fever dream. Beautiful and untouchable and entirely too far away. Marcus Travis appeared at the edge of the frame, working his way through the crowd toward his sister. He moved like someone trained for combat, aware of his surroundings, checking exits out of habit. When he reached Marisa, she turned, and the expression on her face made Long-Su's chest constrict in a way he refused to name. Relief. Pure, unguarded relief. She threw her arms around her brother, and Marcus held her like she was something precious he'd thought he'd lost. Long-Su watched the embrace on his phone screen, his expression carved from ice. Then he powered off the device and stepped out of the Maybach into the cold Seoul night. Time to have a conversation with Marcus Travis. Man to man. Brother to whatever the hell Long-Su was supposed to be to Marisa. The hotel's golden lights reflected in his eyes as he walked through the entrance, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Staff recognized him without being told. They always did. Mr. Travis's room number, Long-Su said to the woman at the front desk. She hesitated for exactly 1 second before her survival instincts kicked in. Suite 1407, sir. Long-Su took the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb. When the doors opened on the 14th floor, he walked down the hushed corridor until he reached Marcus's suite. He knocked once, professional, almost polite. The door opened to reveal Marcus Travis holding a glass of whiskey, still in his leather jacket. His expression didn't change when he saw who was standing in his doorway, which meant he'd been expecting this. Long-Su, Marcus said, his voice carrying a lazy American drawl that somehow made the Korean name sound like an insult. Wondered when you'd show up. We need to talk about your sister. Marcus smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Funny. I was about to say the same thing about your prisoner. Long-Su didn't enter Marcus's suite. There wasn't time for the conversation he'd come for, not anymore. His phone had buzzed twice during the elevator ride, Kang's emergency signal, the kind reserved for when situations were deteriorating faster than anticipated. He turned from Marcus's doorway without a word, leaving the American standing there with his whiskey and his smug smile. Let him think he'd won this round. Long-Su had bigger problems. Boss, Kang's voice crackled through his earpiece as Long-Su strode back toward the elevator. She's leaving. Marcus had a car waiting on the east side of the club. They're heading south on Gyeonggi-Dangil. What kind of car? BMW M5. Black. Diplomatic plates. Of course. Marcus had planned this carefully. Diplomatic immunity meant Long-Su's usual methods of persuasion wouldn't work. No pulling them over with a well-placed call to police he owned. No roadblocks that would mysteriously appear on routes he controlled. This would have to be different. Long-Su hit the ground floor at a run, his expensive suit jacket cutting through the hotel lobby like a blade. Min-jae was already pulling the Maybach to the entrance, but Long-Su walked past it toward the midnight blue Aston Martin DBS Superleggera that his men had just delivered from his private garage. Stay on comms, he told Kang, sliding behind the wheel. I want their exact route. The engine roared to life, a visceral snarl that echoed off the hotel's facade. Long-Su didn't wait for the valet to move the other cars blocking his path. He simply reversed hard, swung the wheel, and launched the Aston Martin into Seoul's late-night traffic, with the kind of precision that came from learning to drive on these streets when he was 14 and running from worse things than traffic laws. The city blurred into streaks of neon and shadow. Long-Su wove between taxis and delivery trucks, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind calculating trajectories and probabilities. Kang's voice fed him updates through the earpiece, turning the pursuit into a chess game played at 140 kilometers per hour. They're taking the Hanam Bridge, heading toward Gangnam. Long-Su cut across 3 lanes, ignoring the blaring horns. The Han River appeared ahead, its dark water reflecting the city's lights like a mirror made of oil and diamonds. The bridge stretched across it, a ribbon of concrete and steel carrying hundreds of vehicles. And somewhere in that flow of traffic was a black BMW M5 with diplomatic plates, carrying the only person who'd ever made the Ghost of Seoul feel something other than cold calculation. Long-Su spotted them 4 cars ahead in the right lane. He could see Marisa's silhouette in the back seat, her head turned toward the window. She didn't know he was there yet. Didn't know that letting her go had never been an option, not because he owned her, but because the thought of her disappearing into the night left him feeling like something vital had been carved out of his chest. He accelerated, the Aston Martin responding like a living thing. 2 cars between them now. 1. The BMW's driver noticed him. Long-Su saw the moment recognition hit, the slight adjustment of posture, the way the vehicle's speed increased just enough to communicate that they knew exactly who was behind them. Good. This would be more interesting if they ran. The BMW cut across 2 lanes, taking the exit toward Olympic Dero. Long-Su followed without hesitation, the Aston Martin's tires screaming as he took the curve at a speed that would make most people pray. The highway opened up before them, 6 lanes of opportunity for the kind of chase that would end with either understanding or wreckage. Long Su pulled alongside the BMW, matching their speed. 80, 90, 100 kilometers per hour. The two vehicles cut through the night like bullets fired from the same gun, neither willing to back down. He glanced through his passenger window into the BMW's back seat. Marisa was staring at him, her face illuminated by the passing streetlights. Her expression wasn't afraid. It was furious. She said something he couldn't hear, probably telling him to back off, to leave her alone, to let her have this one thing. Long Su didn't back off. He accelerated. The Aston Martin surged ahead, and he cut in front of the BMW with inches to spare. The diplomatic car's brakes screamed. Long Su could see Marcus in the front passenger seat, his face carved from stone, already reaching for something, probably a weapon. Long Su brake-checked them, not enough to cause a collision, just enough to send a message. This is my city. These are my streets. You're only driving on them because I allow it. The BMW swerved left, trying to pass. Long Su mirrored the movement, blocking them. They were approaching the Gangnam financial district now, where the buildings rose like glass monuments to money and power. Long Su's monuments. His kingdom. The BMW tried to fake right, then go left. Long Su anticipated it, cutting off every escape route with the kind of precision that came from years of hunting people through these exact streets. The two cars danced, engine against engine, wheel against wheel, neither driver giving an inch. Then Long Su saw it. The turn they'd have to make to reach the private airfield where Marcus undoubtedly had a plane waiting. That's what this was. An extraction. Marcus was taking Marisa out of Seoul entirely, probably to Singapore or Tokyo, somewhere Long Su's reach didn't extend quite as far. Long Su made his decision in the span of a heartbeat. He pulled ahead and then slammed on his brakes. The BMW had 3 choices: rear end an Aston Martin DBS, swerve into oncoming traffic, or take the exit ramp they'd been trying to reach. But the exit came too fast, the angle too sharp for a vehicle traveling at highway speed. The BMW's driver was good, probably ex-military, like Marcus. He took the turn, but not before Long Su saw Marisa's face one more time through the window, her eyes wide, her hand pressed against the glass like she was trying to reach through it. To push him away or pull him closer, Long Su couldn't tell. The BMW disappeared down the ramp. Long Su sat in his idling Aston Martin, hands still gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. His phone buzzed. A text from Marisa, finally. "You can't chase me forever." Long Su stared at the message, then typed his response with hands that weren't quite steady. "Watch me." Marcus's extraction plan had one fatal flaw. He didn't know Seoul the way Long Su had carved it into his bones. The private airfield required crossing through Cheongdam-dong, the wealthiest district in the city, where every establishment from the coffee shops to the luxury boutiques owed their existence to men like Long Su, men who made phone calls that rearranged reality. By the time the BMW pulled up to a red light 3 blocks from the airfield, Long Su had already rewritten the next 10 minutes of Marisa's life. The light stayed red for 45 seconds longer than programmed, long enough for 2 black motorcycles to pull up on either side of the diplomatic vehicle, their riders faceless behind tinted visors. Long enough for Long Su's Aston Martin to slide in behind them, boxing them in completely. Marcus turned in his seat, his hand definitely on a weapon now. But he was smart enough to know that pulling a gun in the middle of Seoul's most surveilled district would end badly for everyone, diplomatic immunity or not. Long Su's phone rang. Marcus's number, which Long Su had acquired approximately 6 seconds after learning who he was. "This is kidnapping," Marcus said when Long Su answered. "This is a conversation," Long Su replied, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded violence. "Tell your driver to turn left at the next light. There's a private club 3 blocks east. Marisa and I are going to talk. You're going to wait in the car like a good brother, or you're going to find out exactly how far diplomatic immunity stretches when nobody can find your body. You touch her." "I've been touching her for 6 months, Marcus." "Where were you?" The line went dead, but when the light turned green, the BMW turned left. The club was called Babel, and it didn't exist on any map or business registry. It occupied the top 3 floors of a building that officially housed a private equity firm. Long Su owned both the firm and the club, along with the 20-story building they inhabited. The entrance was unmarked, accessible only to those who knew which elevator to take and which floor didn't officially exist. Long Su's motorcycles peeled off as the BMW pulled to the curb. He parked the Aston Martin behind them and stepped out into the cold night air, his suit jacket settling perfectly across his shoulders, despite the chaos of the chase. He could see Marisa through the BMW's window, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Good," Fury he could work with. Fury meant she still felt something. Marcus got out first, positioning himself between Long Su and the vehicle. She doesn't want to talk to you. Then she can tell me that herself. She already did. Back in your penthouse, remember? Long Su's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something dark and possessive that made Marcus's hand drift toward his concealed weapon again. 5 minutes, Long Su said. That's all I'm asking for. And if she says no, then you can take her to your plane, and I'll never bother either of you again. The lie tasted like ash on Long Su's tongue, but he delivered it with the same conviction he used to negotiate treaties between rival syndicates. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then turned and opened the back door. Mari, your funeral. Marisa stepped out of the BMW like a queen emerging from a carriage, the emerald dress somehow still perfect despite the night's chaos. Her eyes locked onto Long Su's with the kind of intensity that could start wars or end them. 5 minutes, she said, and then I'm gone, and you're going to let me go. Long Su gestured toward the building's entrance. After you. They rode the elevator in silence, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. Long Su could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that he'd bought her months ago, which meant she'd put it on tonight knowing she was leaving him. That small act of defiance made his jaw tighten. The elevator opened directly into Babel's main room, a space of dark wood and darker intentions. The club was technically closed for a private event, an event Long Su had invented 5 minutes ago, which meant they were alone, except for the bartender who knew to make himself scarce. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, Seoul spreading out below them like a glittering circuit board. Marisa walked to those windows, putting distance between them, her reflection ghosting across the glass. Long Su followed slowly, stalking her the way he'd learned to stalk prey in a very different life. He stopped 5 feet behind her, close enough to see the tension in her shoulders, far enough to give her the illusion of space. You made your point, he said finally. Did I? Marisa turned to face him, and in the low light of the club, she looked like something conjured from his darkest fantasies, beautiful and untouchable and entirely too brave for her own good. Because from where I'm standing, you just chased me through half of Seoul, threatened my brother, and trapped me in your private club. That doesn't sound like a man who got the message. The message was received. Long Su took 1 step closer. The tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe in the shadows, ancient characters spelling out promises he'd made to himself years ago about never being weak, never being vulnerable, never letting anyone matter enough to hurt him. I just don't accept it. You don't get to accept or reject it, Long Su. That's the whole point. Then explain it to me. Another step. Explain why you'd rather run to your brother, who abandoned you in Seoul for 2 years by the way, than stay with someone who's kept you safe, kept me. Marisa's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. That's exactly the problem. I'm not a possession you keep. I'm not a territory you control. I'm a person who makes her own choices, and tonight I chose to leave. Long Su closed the remaining distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly, they were inches apart, his height forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. She didn't step back. She never stepped back, and that was part of why he couldn't let her go. You're right, he said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. You're not a possession. You're the one thing in this entire city I can't control, can't predict, can't own. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is for someone like me? Someone like you. Marisa placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart, and Long Su felt the touch like an electric shock through the expensive fabric of his shirt. You mean a man who built an empire on fear? Who moves through this city like death itself? Who lights a cigarette like he's declaring war? Yes, that person. His hand came up to cover hers, trapping it against his chest where his heart was beating far too fast for the ghost of Seoul. The person who became all of those things so he'd never be powerless again. And then you walked into my life and made me feel exactly that. The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. Marisa's expression shifted, fury giving way to something more complicated. Long Su, I'm not asking you to stay because I own you, he continued, the words coming faster now, like if he didn't say them all he'd lose his nerve. I'm asking you to stay because when you walked out of my penthouse tonight, you took something with you that I didn't know I had left to lose. And what's that? Hope. The word felt foreign in his mouth, too soft for someone who spoke in threats and silence. Hope that I could be something other than this. He gestured vaguely at himself. The tattoos, the tailored violence, the reputation that preceded him like a funeral procession. Marisa stared at him, her hand still trapped against his chest. You're asking me to stay so you can become a better person? I'm asking you to stay so I can try. Marisa pulled her hand away from his chest, but she didn't step back. That small mercy felt like more than Long Su deserved. She crossed her arms, a barrier between them, and waited. She'd learned months ago that silence was the only weapon that worked against him. That if she just waited long enough, the ghost of Soul would fill the void with truths he'd rather keep buried. Long-Su turned away from her, walking to the bar. He pulled out a cigarette from the silver case in his jacket pocket, then paused, staring at it like the small cylinder of tobacco held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "My father smoked these exact cigarettes," he said finally, his voice so quiet, Marisa almost didn't hear it over the ambient hum of the city below. "Korean Esangyong. You can't buy them anymore. I have them custom-made to the original specifications." He lit the cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He'd light one every night after dinner. Just one. He'd sit on our apartment balcony, this tiny rusted piece of metal hanging off a building in Guryong village, and he'd smoke while watching the rich people's lights across the river. Marisa had never heard Long-Su mention his father. She'd assumed, like most people did, that he'd emerged fully formed from Seoul's underworld, born violent and cold, and perfectly constructed for the life he led. Guryong village, she repeated softly. Seoul's last remaining shantytown, a pocket of poverty pressed up against the city's wealthiest district. A place where people lived in houses made of scrap metal and prayer, while billionaires literally looked down on them from glass towers. "I was 7 when the debt collectors came," Long-Su continued, smoke curling from his lips. "My father had borrowed money from the wrong people, tried to start a business, something legitimate. It failed. They wanted their payment, plus interest he couldn't afford." He took another drag, and Marisa watched the ember flare bright and angry. "They gave him a choice, his hands or his son." The words landed like physical blows. Marisa felt her stomach twist, but she stayed silent, letting him speak. "He chose his hands. Told them to take me instead." Long-Su's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real humor. "I remember him lighting a cigarette while they dragged me out of our apartment. Just standing there on that rusted balcony, smoking, watching them throw me into a van. My mother was screaming. He was smoking." Long-Su turned back to face Marisa, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than calculated control in his eyes. She saw the 7-year-old boy who'd learned that love was conditional and protection was a lie. "They put me to work in one of their operations. Delivery boy at first, then lookout, then worse things. I was 12 when I killed my first person, one of the men who'd taken me. I was 14 when I killed the last of them. By 16, I'd taken over their entire territory." He stubbed out the cigarette in a crystal ashtray, the gesture violent despite its quietness. "I went back to Guryong village when I was 17. Found my father still living in that same apartment, still smoking on that same balcony." "What did you do?" Marisa whispered. "I stood there and watched him smoke an entire cigarette, just like he'd watched them take me. Then I asked him if it had been worth it, keeping his hands, losing his son." Long-Su's jaw tightened, the muscle there flexing. He said he'd made the practical choice, that I'd survived, which meant it was the right decision. That if he'd lost his hands, we'd have all starved. "Long-Su. I started smoking that same night," he continued, pulling out another cigarette despite having just finished one. "Same brand, same ritual. One cigarette, when I need to think. When I need to remember what happens when you trust someone to protect you, and they choose themselves instead." He lit it, the flame reflecting in his dark eyes. "And I made myself a promise on that balcony. I would never be powerless again. I would never let anyone close enough to choose themselves over me. I would be the one people feared, the one they couldn't hurt, couldn't leave, couldn't abandon." He took a long drag, and when he spoke again, smoke ghosted from his lips with each word. "And then you happened, you, who wasn't afraid of me, you, who looked at the ghost of Soul and saw just a man, you, who made me feel like maybe I could be something other than this thing I built to survive." Marisa felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "So you held on tighter. You suffocated me with protection because you thought if you controlled everything, I couldn't leave." Yes. The admission was simple, honest. "Because everyone leaves, Marisa. Everyone chooses themselves when it matters. My father taught me that. The streets confirmed it. Every rival I've faced, every alliance I've made, they all end the same way. With betrayal or blood." "I'm not your father," Marisa said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "I'm not one of your rivals or your allies. I'm the woman you claim to love, and love doesn't mean ownership." "I know." Long-Su's hand trembled slightly as he brought the cigarette to his lips again. "I know that. But knowing something and believing it are different things. Every time you pull away, every time you assert your independence, my mind goes back to that balcony, to being 7 years old and watching the person who was supposed to protect me choose the easy path. So you chase me through Seoul. You trap me in private clubs. You make it impossible for me to breathe, because you're so afraid I'll stop breathing for you." Yes. The honesty was brutal and raw, and Marisa found herself taking a step toward him despite every instinct telling her to run. Long-Su, I didn't leave tonight because I don't care about you. I left because caring about you was killing who I am. You've been so focused on not losing me that you didn't notice you were crushing me. Long-Su looked at her, really looked at her, and something cracked in his carefully constructed armor. I don't know how to do this differently. I don't know how to love someone without holding on so tight they can't escape. That's not love, Marisa said gently. That's fear, and I can't live my life being someone's trauma response. Long-Su finished his cigarette and stubbed it out with more care this time. When he looked up at her, his eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. The ghost of Seoul didn't cry, but the man beneath the ghost, the boy from Guryong village who'd learned all the wrong lessons about love and loyalty, he was drowning. Teach me, he said, his voice breaking on the words. Teach me how to hold you without crushing you, how to protect you without imprisoning you, how to love you without destroying everything that makes you worth loving. Marisa stood there in her emerald dress, looking at this dangerous, damaged man who ruled a city but couldn't rule his own demons. And she made a choice. She crossed the distance between them and took his face in her hands. First, she said, you're going to let me leave when I need to leave. Second, you're going to trust that when I leave I'll come back. And third, she looked directly into his eyes, making sure he understood every word. You're going to stop smoking your father's cigarettes and start making your own choices about who you want to be. Long-Su's hands came up to cover hers, and for the first time all night, he smiled. It was small and broken, but it was real. Deal. The window exploded inward before either of them could process what was happening. Glass shattered across the club's dark wood floors like 1,000 falling stars, and Long-Su's body moved on pure instinct. He tackled Marisa to the ground, covering her with his body, as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing seconds before. The emerald dress pressed against the floor, Long-Su's weight crushing the air from her lungs, his hand cradling her head like something precious even as his other hand reached for the gun holstered at the small of his back. 3 men repelled through the broken window with military precision, their faces covered, their weapons professional. Not street thugs, not opportunistic gangsters looking to make a name. These were trained killers, and they'd waited for exactly this moment, when the ghost of Seoul was distracted, emotional, vulnerable. Long-Su fired twice without rising from Marisa, both shots finding homes in center mass. 2 bodies dropped, but the third rolled behind the bar, already returning fire. Wood splintered. Bottles exploded in showers of expensive liquor and glass. Stay down, Long-Su hissed against Marisa's ear. Then he was moving, pulling her behind the dubious cover of an overturned table. His phone was already in his hand, one-handed typing, while his gun tracked the bar's edge. Kang. Babel. Now. But Kang was 3 minutes away, and 3 minutes was an eternity when people were shooting at you. More glass shattered, the other windows this time. 4 additional men swung through, and Long-Su's jaw tightened as he recognized the tactical formation. This wasn't a hit. This was an extraction. They were here for Marisa. The Choi Syndicate, he said, more to himself than to her. They've been waiting for an opening. The who? Marisa's voice was steady despite the chaos, and Long-Su felt a surge of something that might have been pride if they weren't about to die. Rivals. They've wanted leverage against me for months. He fired 3 more shots, forcing 2 of the new arrivals back behind cover. You just became it. A grenade bounced across the floor. Not fragmentation, Long-Su noted with the part of his brain that cataloged threats, but flashbang. He pulled Marisa tight against his chest and turned his back to the device, shielding her with his body. The world went white and silent. Long-Su's ears rang like cathedral bells, but his hands kept moving through muscle memory. He fired blind, trusting his knowledge of the room's layout, creating enough chaos to keep them from advancing during his moment of disorientation. He felt Marisa struggling against him, trying to see, trying to help, and he held her tighter. Don't, he growled, his voice sounding distant and muffled through the ringing. Just don't. His vision cleared in patches. 3 men advancing from the left. 2 more moving to flank. The one behind the bar hadn't moved, which meant he was either dead or waiting for the perfect shot. Long-Su calculated angles, ammunition, escape routes. The elevator was compromised. They'd have someone there. The emergency stairs were across 30 feet of open floor, currently being turned into a shooting gallery. They were trapped, and the Choi Syndicate knew it. One of the flanking men made the mistake of getting too confident. Long-Su put a bullet through his knee, then his chest as he fell. 4 down, 6 to go, plus however many were in the stairwell and elevator. How many rounds do you have left? Marisa asked, her voice clear despite the chaos. She'd pressed herself into the smallest possible target behind him, trusting him to be her shield. And that trust felt like redemption and damnation wrapped in emerald silk. Enough, Long-Su lied. He had 4 bullets left in the current magazine, and 1 spare. Against 6 trained killers, that was optimistic at best. A voice called out in Korean from behind the bar, speaking the Busan dialect. "Longsu, we don't want you. Just give us the girl, and this ends clean." "Nothing about this is clean, Park," Longsu replied, recognizing the voice. Park Min-seok, the Choi Syndicate's lead enforcer. A man Longsu had once done business with before their organizations had fractured over a territorial dispute. "You brought a war to my club. You brought the war when you let yourself get weak over some woman." Park's laugh echoed through the destroyed space. The ghost of soul, brought low by a pretty face. "Our boss sends his regards." Longsu felt Marisa stiffen against him, felt her anger rising like heat. "I'm not some woman," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Marisa. And I'm definitely not going anywhere with people who crash through windows like discount action heroes." Despite everything, the bullets, the blood, the very real possibility of death, Longsu almost smiled. Even cornered and outgunned, she refused to be diminished. Park fired a burst that tore through their cover, forcing Longsu to shift position. Wood chips bit into his face. He returned fire, 1 bullet, making it count. Someone screamed, 5 to go. The sound of boots on stairs reached Longsu's ears. Kang and his team, finally. But they were still too far away, and Park knew it too. The remaining Choi enforcers rushed their position in a coordinated assault, professional and brutal. Longsu stood up, putting himself completely between Marisa and the incoming fire. He fired his last 3 rounds, each one finding flesh. 2 men dropped. The third caught him in the shoulder, the impact spinning Longsu halfway around. He felt the hot bloom of blood, felt his arm go partially numb, but he didn't fall. The ghost of soul had been shot before. He'd been stabbed, beaten, broken. Pain was just information, and the information said he had seconds before they overran his position. Marisa screamed his name. Longsu reached for his spare magazine with a hand that didn't quite respond correctly, and knew he wouldn't make the reload in time. Park stepped out from behind the bar, his weapon trained on Longsu's chest, his smile visible even through his face covering. "Should have given her up, Longsu. Should have chosen survival over sentiment." "That's the difference between us, Park," Longsu said, his voice steady despite the blood running down his arm. "You've never had anything worth dying for." Park's finger tightened on the trigger. And Marisa Travis, the woman in the emerald dress who'd walked out of his penthouse just hours ago, threw herself in front of Longsu with the kind of foolish bravery that made his heart stop. The world narrowed to a single point, Marisa's body between him and the bullet. Park's surprised expression, the sound of Kang's team finally breaching the stairwell door. Longsu caught Marisa mid-leap, spinning them both down behind the table again as Kang's team opened fire. The club erupted into a symphony of violence, professional and overwhelming. The Choi enforcers never stood a chance. Longsu held Marisa against his chest, his blood staining her emerald dress, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell were you thinking?" "That I'm not going to let you die protecting me after we just had a breakthrough," she replied, her hands already assessing his wound with surprising competence. "Also, I'm still angry at you." "Noted," Longsu managed. Then the adrenaline finally caught up with the blood loss, and the world went soft around the edges. The last thing he saw before consciousness left him was Marisa's face above his, fierce and beautiful, and entirely too brave for her own good. Worth dying for, his fading mind confirmed. Definitely worth dying for. Longsu woke to pain and the smell of antiseptic. His shoulder felt like someone had replaced the joint with broken glass and fire. He tried to sit up, and a firm hand pressed him back down against expensive sheets that definitely weren't in a hospital. "Stay still, unless you want to rip Yuna's excellent stitchwork." Marisa's voice came from somewhere to his left, clinical and controlled. Longsu's vision focused slowly. They were in one of his safe houses, the one in Gangnam, judging by the view through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dawn was breaking over Seoul, painting the city in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene after the night's violence. Marisa sat in a chair beside the bed, still wearing the emerald dress, though it was now decorated with his blood in abstract patterns across the silk. She'd pulled her hair back into a practical ponytail, and there was a gun on the table beside her. His gun, he realized. The one he'd been holding when he'd passed out. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough. 3 hours. The bullet went through clean, missed the bone. "Yuna says you'll have full mobility back in a few weeks." Marisa's tone was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing weather, rather than the fact that he'd nearly died. Kang swept the building. 2 of the Choi enforcers survived. "They're in your basement having a very informative conversation with Min-jae." Longsu tried to process that. Min-jae, his driver, was also his most creative interrogator. The Choi Syndicate would be getting a very clear message about what happened when you came after the Ghost of Soul's people. "Marcus?" Longsu asked, remembering the brother who'd been waiting in the BMW. Safe. Kang escorted him to his plane personally. He wanted to stay, but I told him I had this handled. Something flickered across Maurice's face. He didn't believe me at first. I had to show him the surveillance footage. What surveillance footage? Marisa picked up a tablet from the side table and turned it toward him. Long-Su watched the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing through the lingering fog of blood loss and whatever painkiller they'd given him. It was security footage from Babel, time-stamped 20 minutes after he'd lost consciousness. The club was a wreckage of broken glass and bodies. Kang's team was sweeping the space, professional and efficient. And there, in the center of the frame, was Marisa. She was kneeling beside one of the surviving Choi enforcers, the man's own knife pressed against his throat. Even through the grainy footage, Long-Su could see the ice in her expression, the absolute certainty in her posture. She was speaking to the man, her lips moving calmly, and whatever she was saying was making the trained killer's eyes go wide with something that looked a lot like fear. "What did you tell him?" Long-Su asked, unable to look away from the screen. "That if anyone from the Choi Syndicate ever came near either of us again, I would personally hunt down every single member of Park Min-sik's family and make them watch while I dismantled everything they'd ever built." Marisa's voice was casual, like she was describing a grocery list. Then I explained exactly how I'd do it. Very detailed. Very anatomical. Yuna's medical degree came in handy for the creative parts. Long-Su stared at her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the woman he'd been trying to protect, not the possession he'd been desperately clinging to, but the actual person Marisa Travis was, someone who'd survived in Seoul's expatriate community for 3 years before he'd ever met her, someone who'd learned to navigate a foreign city's dangers without a mafia boss hovering over her shoulder. "You threatened Park's family," he said slowly. "I didn't threaten, I promised." Marisa set the tablet down and met his eyes. "Because here's what you never understood, Long-Su. I don't need you to protect me from this world. I need you to trust that I can protect myself, and occasionally protect you." She stood up, smoothing down the blood-stained emerald silk in a gesture that was almost absurdly elegant given the circumstances. "After I finished with the pleasant conversation, I had Kang take me to Park Min-sik's main operation. A restaurant in Itaewon, if you can believe the cliché. Very obvious, very vulnerable." Long-Su's chest tightened. "Marisa, what did you do?" "I walked in through the front door, alone, still covered in your blood. Asked to speak with whoever was in charge now that Park was dead." She picked up the gun from the table, checking the magazine with practiced ease before setting it back down. "Turns out Park's second in command is a woman named Chen. Very reasonable. We had tea. You had tea. Green tea. Excellent quality." Marisa's smile was sharp enough to cut. "I explained that the Choi Syndicate's attempt on your life was based on faulty intelligence. That I wasn't your weakness. I was your equivalent. That any future attacks would be met with the kind of creativity that comes from someone who doesn't have a reputation to maintain and therefore nothing to lose." Long-Su tried to imagine Marisa sitting across from Chen, still wearing his blood, calmly sipping tea, while delivering threats that would make hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. The image was both terrifying and arousing in ways he'd examine later, when his shoulder didn't feel like it was on fire. And Chen agreed to this. Chen is a pragmatist. She saw an opportunity to take over the syndicate without the baggage of Park's vendetta. I gave her that opportunity by making it very clear that continuing Park's war would be terminal for everyone involved. Marisa walked to the window, looking out over the city that was fully awake now. "She's sending a formal apology and reparations. Kang has the details." Long-Su closed his eyes, trying to process the fact that while he'd been unconscious, Marisa had single-handedly negotiated peace with a rival syndicate using nothing but audacity and detailed anatomical threats. "You're insane," he said finally. "I'm capable," Marisa corrected, turning back to face him. "There's a difference. And this is what I've been trying to tell you, Long-Su. I don't need a cage, even a golden one. I need a partner who trusts that I can handle myself when things get dangerous." She walked back to the bed and sat on the edge, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the dried blood under her fingernails, the steel in her spine that matched his own. "You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me," Long-Su said quietly. "You've thrown yourself in front of dozens for me. I figured it was time to return the favor." She took his uninjured hand in hers. "But here's the thing. I don't want a relationship where we're constantly saving each other from threats because you've suffocated me so much that I've become a target. I want a relationship where we stand side by side and dare anyone to come at us." Long-Su squeezed her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, seeing the woman she actually was rather than the fantasy of helplessness he'd constructed in his broken mind. "I'm going to need time," he admitted, "to unlearn every instinct that tells me to lock you away somewhere safe. I know, and I'm going to need time to trust that you won't try to control me every time you get scared." Marisa leaned down, her lips brushing his forehead in a gesture that was tender despite everything. But we have time, Long-Su, because I'm not leaving. I'm just not staying the way you wanted me to. What way are you staying? She smiled, and it transformed her blood-stained face into something beautiful and dangerous. As your equal, your partner. The woman who just convinced a rival syndicate that declaring war on us would be the last mistake they ever made. Long-Su pulled her down gently, mindful of his shoulder, until her forehead rested against his. Remind me never to piss you off. Too late for that, she murmured. But I'm willing to negotiate terms. 2 weeks later, Marisa stood in front of Long-Su's penthouse windows, wearing jeans and a leather jacket instead of emerald silk. Her bag was packed and sitting by the door. Not the desperate escape bag from that first night, but a proper suitcase with clothes and toiletries, and the kind of planning that came from someone who knew exactly where she was going and when she'd be back. Long-Su watched her from the kitchen, a cup of coffee in his hand instead of a cigarette. He'd switched to American coffee as part of their deal, something new, something that wasn't weighted down with his father's ghost. The transition had been harder than he'd expected, but every morning when he reached for the coffee instead of the cigarette case, he felt like he was choosing a different version of himself. Singapore for 3 days, Marisa said, checking her phone. I have meetings with 2 potential clients for my consulting firm. Then Hong Kong for 2 more days to meet with Yuna's contact about expanding into new markets. Alone? Long-Su asked, and was proud that his voice remained steady. Marcus will be in Singapore on business. We're having dinner one night. Marisa turned to face him, and her expression was patient but firm. And yes, alone. No security detail shadowing me. No mysterious men in black SUVs parked outside my hotel. Just me, doing my job, living my life. Long-Su set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Every instinct he'd honed over 15 years screamed at him to forbid this, to lock down her travel, to ensure she was protected every second she was outside his direct line of sight. The ghost of soul didn't let valuable things wander unguarded through the world. But Marisa wasn't a thing, and he was trying very hard not to be just a ghost. I'll have Kang give you contact numbers, he said finally. Not for surveillance. For emergencies. If something happens, I'll call you. Marisa interrupted gently. Because that's what partners do. They ask for help when they need it. They don't assume the other person needs saving every time they leave the house. She crossed the space between them, and Long-Su noticed she moved differently now. More confident. Less like someone preparing to fight or flee. More like someone who knew she had the right to occupy whatever space she chose. I talked to my therapist yesterday, Long-Su said, the words still feeling foreign in his mouth. Another part of their deal. He'd started seeing someone about the Guryong village nightmares and the pathological need to control everything within arm's reach. She says I'm making progress. I know you are. Marisa placed her hand on his chest, over his heart, the same gesture she'd made at Babel. You let me negotiate with the Choi Syndicate without interfering. You didn't send anyone to follow me when I had lunch with Marcus last week. You're drinking coffee instead of smoking cigarettes that taste like your trauma. The coffee tastes like burnt sadness, Long-Su admitted. Most coffee does. You'll develop a taste for it. She smiled, and he felt that smile in his chest, like something loosening. Besides, I've seen your face when I make you that fancy French press stuff. You like it. You're just too stubborn to admit it. I'm trying, he said quietly, his hand coming up to cover hers. To be the person who deserves you. The person who can let you walk out that door without feeling like I'm dying. You don't have to deserve me, Long-Su. You just have to respect me. Marisa leaned up, kissing him softly. And you're getting better at it. Slowly, painfully, with frequent backsliding. But better. What if something happens to you while you're gone? The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and honest and terrified. Then you'll deal with it the way you deal with anything else, efficiently and violently. Marisa's expression turned serious. But Long-Su, things can happen to me when I'm here too. That ambush at Babel proved that. Your protection isn't magic. It's just control wearing a prettier name. He knew she was right, had known it intellectually for weeks. But knowing and accepting were different countries, and he was still learning the language. How do you do this? He asked. How do you walk through the world without being terrified that everything you care about will be taken away? I've already lost things, Marisa said simply. My parents died when I was 19. I moved to a foreign country alone. I've had relationships end and friendships dissolve and plans fall apart. And I'm still here. Still functioning. Still building a life worth living. She squeezed his hand. You survived Guryong village and everything that came after. You're stronger than your fear, Long-Su. You just have to trust that. I don't trust the world. Then trust me. Trust that I know the risks, and I'm choosing to take them anyway. Trust that if I need you, I'll call. Trust that when I come back in 5 days, it's because I want to, not because you've trapped me here." Long Su pulled her close, mindful of his shoulder which still ached in cold weather but had healed cleanly. He breathed in the scent of her shampoo, felt the steady beat of her heart against his chest, and tried to memorize the feeling of holding her without crushing her. 5 days, he said. 5 days, she confirmed. "And then I'm back. Because this is my home too now. Not your penthouse specifically, although the view is excellent, but this. Us. Whatever we're building that's better than what we had before." She pulled back and grabbed her suitcase. Long Su walked her to the elevator, forcing his feet to move, forcing himself not to beg her to stay, or insist on a security detail, or track her phone, or any of the 100 other controlling things that his mind was screaming at him to do. The elevator doors opened. Marisa stepped inside, then turned to face him. "I love you," she said, and it was the first time she'd said those words since the night at Babel. The real you. Not the ghost of soul, not the scared boy from Guryong village, but the man who's trying to become someone better. "That's who I'm coming back to." "I love you too," Long Su replied, and meant it in ways he was still learning to understand. The woman who negotiates with syndicate leaders over tea, who throws herself in front of bullets, who refuses to be anything less than exactly who she is. The elevator doors began to close. Marisa smiled at him through the narrowing gap. "See you in 5 days, Long Su. Try not to burn down the city while I'm gone." No promises. The doors sealed shut, and Long Su stood alone in his penthouse hallway. His phone was in his pocket. Kang was 1 call away. He could have her tracked, protected, shadowed through Singapore and Hong Kong, by professionals she'd never even notice. Instead, he walked back into the apartment, poured himself another cup of coffee, and sat in his chair overlooking the city. Seoul spread before him in daylight, bright and sharp, and no longer quite so hostile. His city, his kingdom, his cage that he'd built brick by brick to keep the world out and himself safe. But Marisa had shown him that cages kept things out both ways. And maybe, just maybe, there was something worth experiencing on the other side of those walls. His phone buzzed. A text from Marisa, sent from the elevator. "Thank you for letting me go. That's the bravest thing you've ever done." Long Su stared at the message for a long moment, then typed his reply with hands that were almost steady. "Come back safe. Not because I demand it, but because I'll miss you." 3 dots appeared. Then her response. "That's exactly why I will." Long Su set down his phone and picked up his coffee. It still tasted like burnt sadness, but there was something underneath that, something bitter and rich and new. He'd learned to love it eventually, the same way he was learning to love without suffocating, to protect without imprisoning, to be someone other than the ghost he'd built from childhood trauma and adult violence. He took another sip and watched the city move without him directing every piece. Somewhere down there, Marisa was already in a taxi, heading to the airport, choosing to leave and choosing to return. And for the first time since he was 7 years old watching his father smoke on a rusted balcony, Long Su felt something that might have been hope. Not the desperate clinging hope that she wouldn't abandon him, but the quiet steady hope that maybe he could become someone who deserved to be chosen rather than feared. The coffee didn't taste quite so bad after that. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.